So, hello everybody. Before we start with our discussion and questions, I would like to remind you all that it would be great if you keep the camera on, if it's technically possible. The workshop will be recorded, so if you don't want to take part of the recording, you can turn off your camera. And in the end, it will be uploaded in the unit of Jahnavi at iVersity and at YouTube, so you can see it afterwards as well. And for a better understanding, we will also like to ask you if you could turn off the microphone while someone else is speaking. Thank you. So it's so nice to see that so many people are interested in today's topic. My name is Mira, and I will lead you through the next hour together with our expert on the topic, Jahnavi Dave. She's the international coordinator of the global network HomeNet International, which represents thousands of home-based workers around the world. Today, our workshop will be about organizing workers across caste, migration status, and religion, with the example of Beedi workers. Just a notice, besides Beedi is a tobacco product and is mostly produced in the western part of India. This should be, as all courses of the Global Labor University, in interactive workshop. So we count with your participation in forms of questions and comments. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to write them in the chat of Zoom. You can find it below, or raise your hand with the technical function in Zoom. I hope you all know how to do it. I think you can find it under reactions next to your video. Okay, let me ask the first question to kickstart the conversation, and then comments and questions are very welcome. Jahnavi, thank you for participating. In your interesting video lecture, you mentioned that the existing informal groups according to workers' caste, religion, and language were very convenient for employers as a channel of recruiting workers. What role did these groups play during the organizing of SIVA? Did they facilitate or hinder the organizing? Did SIVA try to use them? And if so, how?
Thanks, Mira, for that question. And thank you for Global Labor University for inviting me and presenting the video to the rest of the group. When you say Beedi workers, these are actually cigarettes are made at home by home-based workers. So they roll dry tobacco at their home in leaves, tendu leaves. And what we're talking about is in a city called Ahmedabad, where SEWA started with 15,000 home-based workers and went up to 150,000 home-based workers, all Beedi rollers. And they came generally from three different groups. The first was from a different state from Gujarat, so spoke a different language altogether. So they were migrant women who didn't speak the local language. The second was Muslim women who were not from the city. So again, migrants, but from the same state, spoke the language, but were Muslim women who generally had a lot of mobility issues. So they couldn't step out of the home to work anywhere else. And the third group was women who belong to lower caste. Again, access to work really does depend on your caste also, so waste pickers have access to waste picking because they belong to a certain caste, and Beedi rollers had access to this particular work because they belong to a certain caste. So just to say, these are three different groups, and all of them, when we say, a lot of people say they weren't organized, but they were actually organized into their local groups. They had leaders. A lot of them were men. And you asked me, Mira, that did they facilitate the part of organizing? It was both ways. One group actually facilitated. Because these were women, they were wives of the men who worked in textile mills in Ahmedabad. And they were organized by a trade union, and SEWA used to work with them, with that trade union. So they actually facilitated this process of organizing. However, there was another group who actually didn't facilitate. They were really opposed to the fact that of even talking about labor issues. by women of the households talking about labor issues and organizing around it. And there was a lot of pushback also provided at that point of time. However, I think, the fact that really worked for SEWA was because it's a women's trade union. So they were okay if women were organizing women, but if they had leaders who were men, I'm not sure if it would have really worked on the ground. So there were both, there was facilitation by one group, but there was also opposition by another.
Thank you very much for your explanation. It was very helpful. I would like to add a question of a participant which wrote us before the workshop. I'm just going to check if they're here. Okay, no. So this following question is from Sri Lanka, from Liland Kumari, and refers to the workers' role in the negotiations for collective agreements. He asked, do these workers have effective collective bargaining rights? Maybe you can also refer to the definition of the ILO of collective bargaining rights and the case of the Beedi workers. Thank you.
Thanks, Mira, for that question, and from the Sri Lankan organization. I hope they will be able to hear this answer. But I am just going to step back and say that home-based workers as such don't have a policy or legislation in India for them. So as a sector, these workers don't have any policy or laws protecting them. However, within home-based worker sector, Beedi is the only one actually which has a legislation for them. And there's a legacy of it, because Beedi were generally produced in factories. And over the years, actually, employers, they kept changing according to what new laws came in and how they could benefit. So, the production systems changed. Say, for example, when one of the laws came in, they realized they'll have to give social protection to these workers if they were larger in size. They actually, within the family, 4 people would have 4 different companies, but they all belong to the same household. But there were 4 different companies employing people with different tasks. And when they would do something like that, they could evade from this sort of work. And that's how home-based work evolved. And with that, actually, workers' organizations like SEWA pushed for legislation for Beedi workers. They said, Beedi workers, be in factory or be at home, we need laws to protect them. So that's how at least there's a legislation for them to fight, right? And in fact, when you talk about collective bargaining, it's slightly difficult within the informal sector. However, I think after almost 2 decades of SEWA's work, they managed to get these tripartite committees running. And when I say tripartite committees, they ensure there's an employer representative coming. They talked over many years, talked to the labor department that they need to send a representative. And we had women leaders, Beedi rollers, who were there part of these tripartite committees. They meet every quarterly, and they meet annually specifically on the issues of wages, bonus, as well as social protection. So there is collective bargaining happening, but just to say that it's taken almost 2 decades to reach that stage.
Thank you. I think it's very impressive that only the Beedi workers sector has a legislation, and I guess it's very fruitful for other sectors as well. Yeah, and now I would like to ask the audience, the participants, if there are any questions. As a reminder, you can use the chat in the Zoom, or you can raise your hands. So please feel free to ask the expert some questions. Okay, I can see now a question from Sabizwara. Would you like to ask the question or shall I read it? Maybe you can better tell it in your own words, Sabizwara.
You can read it. Actually, I'm in a noisy place. That's why. Hello.
Hi,
Okay.
hi.
Yeah.
I
You
think I
just
can.
can read it. Yeah. I'm in a noisy place. That's why. Sorry.
Okay. I'm gonna read it then. Thank you. So Sabizwara is asking, what are the main provisions of Beedi Welfare Fund Act and how they are working?
Right. While you read this question, you can figure out it is from an Indian because, they've called it a Beedi Welfare Fund Act. So just to mention that, there are many provisions under this. One is minimum wages, though now we're pushing for living wages if that's a possibility. There are many aspects of, like the welfare board that they have. So they've made a welfare board which has provisions of pensions, provident fund. It also has for children, I think what it's called is, I'm forgetting, but there is a scholarship program, scholarship program for the children. And that's something which they added is because, many people say home-based work has a lot of child labor. And women said it's because they drop out of schools, and they drop out of schools is because there is not enough money to send them to school. So they started with the scholarship program for the children of Beedi workers. So that was also a big demand of the workers, which was successful. So these are some key part of the act.
Many things. There are many more questions. So I'm just going to read the next one from Laura Raquel Murillo. How difficult is it to change mindsets about the role of women in their homes and in society?
Right. Thanks, comrade Laura. Laura's a sister from Vigo, and we work together. Thanks for that question. And I've actually worked also with Seva for many years, and we've organized home-based workers, street vendors, waste pickers, and domestic workers. Just to say, organizing workers itself is difficult. Then organizing informal sector workers is difficult. Women workers is furthermore difficult. And within the informal sector, home-based workers are by far the toughest sector workers to organize because they work from their own homes individually. They're scattered. So they're hidden and scattered. And that's the biggest reason why many trade unions actually don't take upon this task of organizing home-based workers. Now you've talked about women and the mindset. So a lot of home-based workers. So, the case that I presented, there were three different categories of women workers. One was the migrant workers who came from a different state and their husbands worked in the garment factories. And they were well aware of the rights. They saw themselves as workers. However, I also talked about two other categories of workers. One was the Muslim women, and the second, where women belong to a lower caste. They themselves didn't see, as workers. Their primary responsibility was actually care. So taking care of their children, elderly in the household, cooking, cleaning, fetching water. In India, you actually don't have 24 hours supply of water. They have to stand in queues at common water taps to fetch water. So they were responsible for all of that. And this was the only remunerative work that they could access. So they saw care responsibility as their primary work and home-based work or rolling Beedis as something that gave them income. But, so they couldn't see themselves as work. Also, the fact many home-based workers, when we talk a lot about, do you see yourself as workers? They don't, is because, the visuals of work is when you go out and work. When you go to factories and work, the husbands are going to factories and working. Even street vendors, they go out and sell products. Domestic workers go to somebody else's house and work. waste pickers are on the street, on the dump sites, at the dump sites and are working. But home-based workers, because they work from home with a lot of care responsibilities, many of them don't see themselves as workers. So there's a lot of, in the organizing, first few trainings are around work and workers and how to identify and see yourself as workers. So that is one. And Laura also asked about society seeing them as workers. I mean, I also feel it's become convenient. And when we say society, it's, there are many factions to the society, right? So employers find it very convenient to not recognize them as workers, right? Government has also found it easier. They don't have to build policies. They don't have to, budget anything around, say, social protection or something to back up the policies. So society as large also has found it convenient to not see them as workers. Yeah, Dora, have I answered your question? Thanks.
Many thanks. This, you just mentioned it already, but the next question is from Aisha, and it has also to do with, like, we can just continue speaking of this dual identity. But Aisha, please go ahead and ask the question by yourself.
Okay, I'm a bit having a cold, so why were the women unable to see themselves as workers? And could Jahnavi please elucidate on the dual identities that the Beedi workers had or have? Thank you.
Right. Thanks for the question, Aisha, and hope you recover soon from the cold. Nowadays, anybody sneezes or has a cold, we start getting worried. So I hope you recover soon. On your question, the answer is quite related to what I've already talked about, is that home-based workers, for many of them, actually, this is entry-level work, entry-level to the labor force itself. Some of them do, over a period of time, work in different areas also, but this is the only remunerative work which they are left with, because when they get, a lot of them, start working at a young age, 18 years old, when they're already studying, but this might be the only remunerative work. Or when they get married, they don't have other options because they have this entire responsibility of taking care of the household. That's the primary job. And we're talking about a very patriarchal society that we have. Actually, I feel patriarchy is around the world, but I think we are gifted in a country like India, where there's a lot of patriarchal norms which keep women bound to their households, and in that, the primary responsibility is, again, like I said, taking care of children, fetching water, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the elderly. So that's the job that they have, which is not paid. And the remunerative work is to roll beedies. It's convenient for them because a lot of this work is also provided at their doorstep. So they don't have to really go out. So when I talk about Muslim women, when mobility was a big issue at that point of time, was also because they couldn't step out to even get any work. Many of them were actually quite skilled. They could do embroidery work. They could actually stitch clothes. However, they were not able to step outside and actually get the material and do all of that work. This was more convenient, and maybe the only option they had is because somebody came, a subcontractor came to their household to provide that work. I hope I've answered. Thanks, Aisha.
Thanks, Jahnavi. I saw a hand from Kunle. I don't know if you still want to ask the question. Kunle? Okay, then we're gonna go to the next hand from Vanshiku. I hope I spell your name correctly. Please correct me and go ahead. And after that, George is gonna be able to ask a question.
Okay, hi everybody. It's Wanjiku from Nairobi, Kenya. So my question was about I wanted you to bring some clarity on the point of street vendors organizing themselves into those trade groups that are able maybe to form unions. is it the street vendors that are maybe registered under the local government, or just any street vendors? Like in my city, there are some street vendors who pop today and tomorrow they are not there, or maybe they have relocated to somewhere else. And I just wanted to know, is it every street vendor or those ones that are recognized by the local authority? And if not, if it's all of them, then how are you able to how are those unions able to organize such people? Thank you.
Thank you, Wanjiku. But I'll just, maybe say that at this stage, we are organizing home-based workers, not street vendors. But I can talk to you about my past experience, and we have sister organizations who are organizing street vendors. So again, all informal sector workers, it's difficult to organize them. And street vendors are also one of the categories. They're better organized than home-based workers. However, it is also very difficult to organize street vendors because their markets are also scattered, right? So one market would have 25 vendors, and another one would have 50 vendors. Some would have only 10 vendors, and getting them together is not always easy at a city level or at a country level also. However, there are different forms of organizations that they have. So they're either organized into unions. There are many good examples across the world where they're organized as unions. They're organized as street vendor associations. They're also organized as self-help groups. So there are different forms of organizing that they have taken. The membership-based organizations, that's the ones that I'm talking about. In fact, street vendors also have a global network called StreetNet International, which is much older than ours. We got registered only 2 years back, but StreetNet International is has a much longer history than ours, and they're organizing globally also. So there are many groups across the world of street vendors organizing. Manjiku, is there a follow-up question, or have I answered your question?
Well answered. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you have raised your hand and you don't have any question, please put it down again. Thank you. So I can have an overview of who is wanting to speak. So George, please go ahead.
Thank you. And sorry that I can't come on with my camera because my internet is very unstable here. Mine is not a question, but I wanted to make a comment and agree with Jahnavi on the part where in the video clip and in her explanation, she talks about the connection of job associated with homes and working overtime without pay. And I think this is also true even in the formal sector, as we have observed during the COVID-19 lockdown, where people work from home. People who work from home, usually you just keep working and working and working, and I mean, you never even realize that you are, I mean, it's time to knock off and you are still working, and all of that is not taken into consideration. So that is a very striking point that really needs to be considered when job is connected to home. It makes you to even work more hours than necessary, and that is not taken into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George, for the question. Actually, maybe I had connectivity issue. Mira, could you actually repeat the question or part of it?
Sorry. I think maybe it's from my end that the network is not good. I was only trying to make a comment and alluding to the fact that you made this point that when work is connected to home, it leads to some kind of exploitation, overtime, working overtime, and that is not being recognized. So I was just bringing it out that even in the days of the COVID, we realized that even formal sector people work at home and they work overtime. Sometimes the time you take to commute to work, you already start to work, and then after working hours, you are still working, but those are not taken into consideration just because you are working. And I think this is a very important point that we all get to. Thank you.
Thanks, George. That was very clear. And thank you for adding that observation that, I think due to COVID, a lot of people around the world, in fact, I think there was an ILO statistics, which was before the pandemic in 2019, and that said there are 216 million home-based workers around the world. And I think some recent statistics actually highlight that there are over 500 million sorry, 500,000 home-based workers around the world that we have. Just to say, many have now figured out some of the challenges of home-based work, which we've been talking about over the years, which is low wages, well below minimum wages, working overtime. And for the home-based workers that we are talking about, it's also access to work that, sometimes they have a lot of work. It's seasonal, so for a lot of incense stick workers, people in India, in the same geography, they also live as Beedi workers. They roll incense sticks, but they can't do it during monsoons. Even Beedi workers can't work during monsoons because, all the products become damp. So they can't work during those times. And what do? Do they just switch off for 2 months? They can't, because they need that money, to run their households. So this entire thing about access to work is also a big thing for home-based workers. And yeah, you've pointed out correctly that overtime is never accounted, actually, never accounted for home-based workers, and which is a shame, because in many areas we've seen government sector workers, when there's a peak season, they work 16 to 18 hours a day also, which is extremely exploitative. So thanks for observing that.
Thank you for your question and your answer, Jahnavi. There's another question from the Philippines, from Michael. He just wrote that his internet network is unstable. So I'm going to read it if it's okay. But please tell me, Michael, if your connection is better now. If not, I'm going to read it from the chat. How did organizing expand from the initial collaboration of one group, migrant workers from Andhra Pradesh, to cover all other women Beedi workers discriminated along the lines of caste and religion? Home-based workers at work was earlier characterized in our course as particularly difficult to locate, trace. Was a rough estimate of the population of women Beedi workers already known and thus targeted for organizing prior to SIVA's work, or was the scope of organizing iterative and just eventual expanded starting from the initial group of migrant workers who reached out to SIVA? Is it clear for you, or should Michael add some points, Jahnavi?
It would be good to maybe, if he could explain the question a little bit, but if his internet works, that is.
Michael, could you try to ask the question and explain it a little bit better?
Hello, am I heard clearly? Yes. So I asked the question because I was interested about how SIVA was able to organize the number of women workers that it did. The video talked about how it started with an initial group of migrant workers. So I was interested how it expanded. Was SIVA, was there data available to SIVA that pointed out how expansive this home worker exploitation was, or was it just discovered on the ground as there was completed collaboration with the initial group?
Right. Thank you for that question, Mikhail. And a lot of organizing work has this snowballing effect. So just to start, that SIVA didn't have this data on how many Beedi workers, home-based workers exist. I don't even think the primary employer really knew how many workers were there within their supply chains. They had some idea, but not the entire picture. But when these women from a different state called Andhra Pradesh, it's southern part of India, migrated there, the husbands who used to work in the textile mills, they had, the husbands used to talk about labor rights. So they were flute onto those issues. Also realize there's a women's organization who's working on organizing informal sector workers, and they reached out to them and said, let's organize. You know, we need to demand for minimum wages. We want more rights. And that also started snowballing because, you know, just to say they live in informal settlements, and a lot of other groups also live in similar informal settlements, right? So especially migrants, you know, so that really bound them together. So a lot of women who were from Andhra Pradesh lived close by to the Muslim women also who were making beedi, and to also the women, the third group who belong to the lower caste. So, you know, it is actually home as the workplace, which supported, helped Seva to identify where the workers are there and started organizing them. The other category, you know, the way they did was through subcontractors, you know, so the employers would not give data. However, subcontractors know where they're providing work. And while a lot of people put these subcontractors as always these villains, you know, who are exploiting home-based workers, but many of them also belong to the same low-income households. They are brothers of these women, husbands, relatives, neighbor, and they do support organizing process. So many of them also told them where they're providing work in different locations and help Seva to organize home-based workers. I hope that that's answered your question.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much.
It is great to see so many questions and so much interest. So I go straight ahead to India again, to Saraswara. I think you need to help me a little bit. I'm going to read it, but please explain your question again, okay? I have some questions related to the challenges faced by the workers, such as occupational health and diseases, harassment, if any, from the middlemen. Could you explain your question in your words, please, Saraswara?
I think Jahnavi, I can follow this because for making beedi, you know, the worker need tobacco, and you know, per day they have to roll thousands of beedis, so they have to sit for longer time. So just I wanted to her to elaborate. I know little bit, so other can understand. And since the agent is coming to supply raw materials and also come to collect, I'm talking in the context of a rural setting, and it is reported that most of the workers are women. So and the person who come to collect is basically a male. So sometimes there is report of, you know, harassment. I don't know. So just we wanted to listen from her. I think it is clear.
Yeah. Thank you, Sabeshwara. That's very clear. So first, to talk about occupational health and diseases that they get is, you know, beedi workers work from their own homes. In rural areas, actually, the working conditions are slightly better than the urban areas. And that's because of the settlements that they live in. The informal settlements, you know, when I'm talking about Ahmedabad here in this case, they're very small in size, right? So, you know, the larger ones are 10 feet by 12 feet. So you can imagine, you know, how small these houses are. And there are families living there, cooking, everything, studying, everything happens there. And women are also making beedis there. Sometimes they just sit outside, a little outside their home, you know, and they work together. Sometimes 2-3 women would come together and start rolling beedis. So this is a setting in which they're working. And in the urban areas, these localities are actually very congested, right? So lack of ventilation is there, sometimes poor lighting, you know, sunlight doesn't come very well in these houses. So the issues that they face are, you know, some of the breathing trouble, you know, because they feel suffocated sitting in the house and doing a lot of this work for many hours. The second, what they've complained is about backache, because they sit on the floor and they don't have a table or anything to support it. So, they bend down a lot and do rolling of these Beedi. So these are two key issues. Many older women then complain about eyesight getting weak. That's also the third issue which they constantly talk about. So these are things that we've heard from Beedi workers. I mean, there is an entire, Seva has their own health cooperative, which also works on these issues. They identify OHS issues and work with the women to find local solutions. So, say, for example, just have small tables which you can use, women can use while sitting on the floor to actually have a better posture. They have a housing unit which works on, housing improvements. So there is, what they put is within the house, they actually elevate only a box to improve ventilation and sunlight coming in. So there are local solutions that they found with the women on occupational health and safety and home as workplace. So these are OHS issues. And you've talked about harassment faced by middlemen and the subcontractors. That's a reality in the entire home-based worker sector, not just Beedi workers, but in all other sectors, garment sector. In fact, there's even more of these stories that we hear. There is a lot of harassment that they face by middlemen, especially if they're not part of their own communities. If they come from a different community, they face a lot of harassment. Sometimes, in fact, we've heard of stories where they would give work, get all the finished products, and for a month they would not pay, and then they would just vanish. So all the effort that women have made for a month, they have no non-payment. Of course, they have their own strategies that they've developed over the years to fight back or to bargain more from these middlemen, but it's a reality. Harassment is a big reality in home-based worker sector. And in fact, women also organize around this issue a lot.
Thank you very much. There's one question from Phyllis. Could you ask a question by yourself, please, Phyllis? Phyllis, are you there? Okay, then I will read the question, and if there is any other question, maybe she will be back in a bit. How can we end casualization employment of domestic workers and adapt contract employment where they enjoy the minimum terms and conditions?
Right, thanks, Meera. But I'm assuming this person, Phyllis is here, but do they mean home-based workers and not domestic workers here? Or is it for domestic workers sector?
Phyllis, maybe you can answer quickly in the chat.
All right, thank you. Yeah, she's talked about domestic workers. So just to mention that a lot of people also tend to get confused between domestic workers and home-based workers. So one big difference is home-based workers work from their own homes in different sectors, so they provide services or produce goods working in and around their homes in various sectors. However, domestic workers work in the employer's home. So they, they're basically doing cleaning services, the cooks that people get at their homes, the drivers, all of that, the gardeners, they're all domestic workers. And you've talked about that. Again, I'm not from that sector. I'm representing home-based worker sector. And we do have a global network called International Domestic Workers Federation, which is a global network of domestic workers who's working on these issues. But I think contracts is something which is welcome because that also creates transparency and helps domestic workers with minimum terms and conditions. And I know there are many of the organizations, including Seva, they've developed templates of these contracts for domestic workers and how workers can push for these contracts with their employers. However, there hasn't been enough success is what I know. However, I don't think I can answer on behalf of the domestic worker sector.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, maybe just a small note. There's also a course, sorry, a video in this course about home-based domestic workers. So maybe or check as well the difference between home-based workers and domestic workers. So the next one is from Vanchiku, and after Ugo Chukwu. Please help me again with the names. So go ahead.
It's Wanjiko. So I wanted to ask about the retirement benefits that Sewa was able to lobby that the Beedi workers will get. So I wanted to find out, maybe I missed it somewhere in the discussion, but are these Beedi workers, the home-based workers, are they employed under a particular company or they are subcontracted? So that I need to know, how do they do their remittance for the retirement benefits? Because like for us in the formal sector in our country, you know, a part is remitted by the employer and another is from your own salary. And if you're self-employed, there is of course you can remit your retirement benefits, your whatever, your deduction directly to that social security fund. So I wanted to find out how are they able to follow up, or I don't know, I just want to find out about how that remittance is done for the home-based workers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that question, Wanjiku, and also a very important one, because we can easily talk about pensions, but how do workers really get it? Because it's so scattered, you don't even know who they're working for. So there are key employers within the city of Ahmedabad, who own these companies, but all this work is subcontracted through a series of middlemen, right? And while they do know now, because they're very well organized, that these are the employers, but the way this pension works is that, I think Seva pushed to have a welfare board. So for Beedi workers, what you have in India is a welfare board for Beedi workers, where employers are expected to contribute. And the workers have to register themselves, and then they can access pension, right? So that's how it works. It's not very easy, however, to register with these welfare boards. So the government would make these nice welfare boards, which are not accessible for the workers. And that's the reality. But again, I think here Seva's local organizers play a big role in, getting the applications, getting them filled. A lot of these women, are also not literate. They can barely sign their names, and Seva helps them fill these applications, submits them in bulk, because they can't skip their work and stand in queues for days to submit these forms, or sometimes get the benefits out of these welfare boards. So Seva supports on linking and accessing benefits from the welfare board too.
Thank you. There's a question from Zimbabwe, from Yokonia, but it's also more related to domestic workers. Would you like to ask a question by yourself, or maybe also do you have another question related to home-based workers, Yokonia? Yokonia, are you there? Okay. So his question was, what are the chances and opportunity to have domestic workers convention to be included under core conventions? Yeah, like we said before, or you said before, you're not specifically specified for the domestic workers, but if you have a quick answer to that, please go ahead.
So again, I may not be very accurate in answering this, but from what I understand is for it to be a core convention, it needs to have a much broader reach. So, sector specific conventions that we have, it's very difficult to make them into core conventions. Recently, I think the occupational health and safety has become one of the core conventions, but that cuts across many sectors. And I feel that's how it seems to be working, but I may not be 100% right here. Thanks.
Thank you. The next question is also very interesting. I was about to ask the same, actually. It's from Aisha, and she asked me to read the question. What are some of the other successes of SIVA in organizing migrant Beedi workers across different religions and castes?
Yeah, I mean, SEVA, the way it works is also expands quite a lot. I think they have 2.1 million informal economy women workers as the members, and it's across India. They're a national trade union, and many of them are home-based workers, but not all of them. But this, the case that I presented was only in the city of Ahmedabad. They have organized workers across India. So, not only the state of Gujarat, but there's a neighboring state, which is in the central part of India, which is Madhya Pradesh. They've organized many Beedi workers there too. So this movement has gone beyond one location, one state to many states of India. And that's where I think the strength lies. The strength lies in numbers. And this has become a big success for SEVA.
Thank you very much. And now Ugo Chukwu is back, so please go ahead with your question.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was disconnected initially. Actually, the question I want to ask is this: based on observation of the situation in my own country, Nigeria, just like you said earlier on, one of the challenges is that of organizing the informal sector workers. Basically, the domestic workers even present more challenge comparatively. But here, one of the challenges again is that of assessing social security programs that the government provides, because oftentimes they are negotiated through trade unions, and then this group of workers don't have trade unions. They do not belong to trade unions because of the problem of organizing them. But in this case, I just want to know, in the case of India, the Beedi workers, in this case, domestic workers, do they have any access to any social protection? And if they do, how actually did they come about getting that? That's my question.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. And again, just to say, Beedi workers are home-based workers who work from their own homes, rolling Beedis, so rolling these Indian cigarettes. And you've rightly pointed out, actually, social protection is a big issue. Home-based workers in general don't have access to social protection. Firstly, they're not recognized as workers. Second, they don't have a policy protecting them. And therefore, there is no social protection for them, right? But for Beedi workers, especially, this is one category of home-based workers who do have access to some form of social protection. And, when you say these government programs, these are actually social assistance programs. So like I mentioned, Beedi workers have a welfare board, which provides pensions, which provides provident fund, maternity benefits, scholarships for children. Again, very difficult to access, but SEVA's role also comes in, so they not only organize workers and then just let them be, but they also keep looking at where are the different challenges and develop leadership to actually navigate. And sometimes they become large programs in itself, so just to access these benefits, there is the local leadership which supports them to access these benefits out of the welfare board. If you ask me about other home-based workers, they don't even have any of these things. They, it's very difficult for them to access. There used to be unorganized workers welfare board. Again, very difficult to access, but we used to register home-based workers to these welfare boards. Now in India, that all these laws, labor laws have been dissolved and then to 4 of these buckets. So it's made it even more challenging for them to access any social assistance programs. But just to reiterate that, we have many membership-based organizations under HomeNet International. So they're unions, cooperatives, producer-owned companies, community-based organizations. And during the pandemic, what we saw was that even the bare minimum social assistance programs that the government provided, home-based workers couldn't access it, basic things. And that's where these membership-based organizations played a big role in ensuring that benefits reach their own members. And in fact, membership grew during the time of the pandemic of these organizations. I hope I've answered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Due to the time, I would say I give the word to Sarwiswar last time, and then I would like to finish with one last question. If there's no urgent question, I would go ahead with Sarwiswar.
Can you please read the question, Mira?
Sure. So Sarwiswar wrote, lowercase means Dalit, scheduled caste, I suppose. Caste is a reality in India and very strong in Gujarat as well, and caste factors many times weakens a strong collective action. How Seva has addressed this issue in the process of mobilizing the Beedi and other home-based workers?
Yeah, when you say caste, lower caste, we do mean the scheduled caste who are part of this group that I presented the case. Yeah, I mean, caste discrimination is a reality across India, including the state of Gujarat, and it can play a divisive role also, dividing within the union. However, I think Seva has done an excellent job of bringing them together, irrespective of the differences in caste, religion, language groups, because it's a national trade union now. So, the different languages that people speak. I think there are many strategies that they've employed. They're very conscious of that there is a lot of diversity within the union also. So it's not one group of informal economy women workers. It's many. There are layers of diversity, right? And I'll just give you one example of something which they do very well is every morning when they start their work, be it in the fields, where home-based workers are organized, or a training program that is happening, or the union. So everywhere at the same time, they have a prayer. And women have developed this prayer over the years, which talks about all the gods, which talks about, they take some pledges that what are they going to do and not going to do as a union, as a member of the union. And I think that is also a big binding factor. It was very surprising for me when I joined Seva the first day. There was we spent 20 minutes, long minutes singing these prayers and pledges and everything. But over the years, I realized that this is a unifying factor for women. And, you have a prayer from the Quran to a prayer where they talk about all gods. So Buddhist, all of that. So it's surprising, but they've developed these prayers and it seems to be working very well for them. It is a unifying factor. The second, maybe I'll just talk briefly about is that they've also over the years, I think the leadership that they build in the grassroots leadership, I think they have also identified to put labor issues above other issues. So there is one unifying factor despite the diversity. So we identify the diversity, but we focus on a few key issues together, right? And that's something also that's worked.
Thank you a lot. I think it's very motivating that things like prayers can help and like to bring people together and find solidarity to face all the challenges they have. Um, I would like to end the discussion conversation with a last question. So you also discussed in your video the importance of a strong women's movement as a critical factor in sustaining the gains from organizing. Could you also, if you already talked a little bit about that already, could you elaborate further on this? How important is that a women's movement recognizes the diversity of women? Thank you.
Yeah, I think, when I meant that we need a very strong women's movement to actually sustain some of the benefits or, the successes is also because I've seen many organizations, who would have some gains. However, there's nobody to really continue that or benefit out of it over the years. And a strong women's movement, I mean, the workers' movement themselves, is very important to sustain the organization and take benefits out of this gain. Now, a quick example is, Seva also won a case against the employers to get Provident Fund. Now, that case went on for 15 years, I think, and they are still ensuring, that workers get Provident Fund. It's become a huge amount, over the years, and now workers are actually celebrating that and getting it. But if there was no sustained movement, a women's movement to really push that, I don't think that would have succeeded. Sorry, Mira, what was the second part of your question?
It was how important is that a women's movement recognizes the diversity of women? Yeah.
Thanks for asking that, because, when, like I said, it's not one group. India is a diverse country. It's a huge country with a huge population with a lot of diversity. From north to south, there's so many languages that are spoken, caste issues across India that we have. There are many religious minorities that we have, and especially today, it's very difficult to actually manage this diversity. And therefore, it's also very important that in a women's movement, when someone's coming in, you don't just treat everyone saying with the same level of thing, because you have to understand the context where they're coming from. And therefore, it's very important to understand the diversity with which they're coming. So a Muslim woman would come, Beedi roller would come with different issues from, say, a lower caste woman who's also making babies. The discrimination itself is very different for both of them. And the discrimination faced by who is also very different, right? So I think identifying that is actually plays a key role in organizing them. I think, an organization, trade union like Seva would not have sustained over 50 years if they did not identify these diversity within their own movement and still brought them together as a union or the unifying union.
Thank you very much. Also, a big thank you for all the participants. I think we have had a very fruitful conversation, and we could all learn from each other. And yeah, I think we have a good overview now about intersexual discrimination across caste, religion, and migration status, but also gender, with the example of the Beedi workers. And I think no matter where we are coming from, where we are working in a trade union, in collaborations, we can all learn from that. And yeah, many thanks. And please, we have some other workshops coming. So please participate and also watch the videos before participating in our next workshops. The next one is tomorrow. It's about the Amazon workers, and I hope to see you all there. Thank you a lot. That's it. Adlira, if you would like to add something, all good? Okay. Then,
sorry, Mira, I would actually like to step in and just thank Seva for their wonderful work. They are one of our affiliates, a very important organization, and one of the affiliates of WomenNet International. I would like to thank them for their excellent work, and we hope all the participants here keep reading about the work of our affiliates around the world. This was just one case in India, but there are many other organizations in Latin America, Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. It was a wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you for making it so vibrant.